Attention Royal Enfield Super Meteor 650 owners, if you've recently upgraded your suspension or added luggage racks, you could be facing a hidden danger that might lead to a rear suspension failure. In this video, we'll try to uncover the cause and show you how to protect your ride from this potential disaster. Stay tuned to keep your Meteor 650 cruising smoothly. Just over 4 months ago, a truly shocking video surfaced on YouTube. A double rear suspension failure on a Super Meteor 650. This is how the owner and creator of that video described the experience in his own words.
Hey, what's up guys? So this is tragic. The rear suspensions of my Super Meteor broke. Yes, broke in half, both of them. The rod that connects the shocks internally, also known as a cartridge, broke down into 2 pieces and the whole assembly came off completely. While riding, first the left side and then moments later the right side too.
The creator of that video, AutoRev, has kindly given me permission to use parts of his footage today. I'm also excited to share that he's a subscriber to Teacher T Thailand. Be sure to check out his full, well-presented video. I'll drop a link in the description below. This tragic incident occurred on his way to work in Mumbai, India. Thankfully he was close to a Royal Enfield service centre at the time, but even the engineers there were baffled. They'd never seen anything like this before. Interestingly, this is the only video on YouTube highlighting this issue, and I must admit I was initially a bit suspicious. The conclusion of the video seemed to suggest that the blame lay with the Zana saddlebag racks, specifically their mounting position on top of the rear suspension. Then, just a week later or so, Royal Enfield released their own panniers and racks designed to fit into the hole near the rear suspension. Finally, we know what that ugly hole was designed for. My suspicion at the time: could this have been a strategic move by Royal Enfield to promote their long-awaited pannier system? However, after making this video, I now just think it was pure coincidence. As someone who has recently fitted the Auto Engineer racks to my bike in a similar position on top of the rear suspension, I can't help but feel a little concerned. So let's put on our detective hats and dive into this mystery together. Can we figure out what really went wrong here? And can the issue be solely attributed to the pannier racks? And spoiler alert, the answer is no. There are other factors in play here.
The solution was to replace the part, the entire assembly. There's no way this could have been repaired. The internal connecting rod was broken, and the price of the part was 4,800 rupees for a pair of rear shocks, and the price of the part was 4,800 rupees for a pair of rear shocks plus labor.
4,800 rupees? That's the equivalent to 45 UK pounds or 60 US dollars. Can you get quality rear suspension for this price? Let's look closely at the evidence. Firstly, on the broken shock, I can see that it's set at minimum preload 1. Secondly, I can spot a pillion in this shot. Thirdly, you can see the minimum amount of travel this suspension unit has when it's set at preload 1. This will certainly bottom out over a large bump in the road.
I hit one of those steep speed bumps. I was probably doing 35-40 when I hit the bump. Had to brake suddenly and I heard a cracking sound from near the saddle. I look down on my left and I see the shocks wobbling.
On page 12 of the owner's manual, accessories and luggage, it states soft panniers should not be more than 3 kilograms each side. And more importantly, on page 92 it states preload setting on suspension preload 1 should not exceed 90 kilograms in weight. Do I think the saddlebag stays caused the incident? Not directly. I think what's happened is these stays were overly tightened on the suspension, preventing the suspension from moving. This is my Auto Engineer aftermarket saddlebag stay, which is fitted to the top of the rear suspension, very similar to the one in this incident. This is my concern. The bottom one, the bottom fitting, I can do that up as tight as I want because it's not connected to any moving part. However, this is connected to a moving part. And the same as the handle, which we used to put it on the center stand, right? So we can do it up tight, but not overly tight. Otherwise, we're going to restrict the movement of the suspension left and right. So just to prove a point, I'm going to undo the bottom bolt, remove the bolt, and move my suspension. Can you see I've got movement in my suspension there? That's because this is not overly tightened. It's only 18 Newton meters or 13 foot-pounds. It's not overly tightened at all. And I've got movement in the shock, and the same would be on the torque setting for the bottom as well. So the shock's got movement. It's not going to cause stress fracture. That's what's happened. It's had a stress fracture over a period of time. And when he went over that bump, boom, that's what caused it to snap. So it was months in the making. That incident, it was months in the making. His argument there didn't stand up, unfortunately, that I fitted these stays 4 months ago and it's taken all this time to break. That's why it took 4 months. It was causing stress on that joint, I think, because they were over tightened. I do see, sadly, my brothers in India, they do like to over tighten things, right? You do need to torque and get these settings correct. Even though that's not overly tight, my saddle stay is not going anywhere. And for safety, you just paint some paint on the nuts and on the bolts, and then you can see if they're turning in the future just by visual check. Like you do on an aircraft, you do a visual check before you take off in an aircraft. This is my aircraft. I'm going to do a visual check, make sure that the blue paint hasn't moved over a period of time, and then I know everything's good. And what we can also do is use Loctite, right? We can use Loctite to stop these bolts, these nuts from unscrewing themselves with the vibration of the bike. And this is a very old Honda covered in cobwebs, something I bought to restore and never got around to doing as of yet. Maybe next year when I retire, and a nice little project for me to video. But anyway, this has got traditional fitting for shocks, and you can't really over tighten it because this is a thread, and when that nut's done up tight, the thread stops. So you can't really over tighten these. But again, it's because the movement left and right. So traditional shocks are like this. What Royal Enfield have done is a little bit unusual, but you know, it works as long as you don't over tighten them. And it's a very unusual fitting, this, for a rear suspension, because it's like in a C cup. So there's a metal sheet all the way around the suspension, unlike traditional suspension. Actually, this is probably the first time I've seen a suspension like this. So again, if you over tighten, those metal plates are going to cramp onto the metal of the suspension and crush the rubber either side of the suspension unit. So if you over tighten this, it's going to definitely restrict the movement of your suspension. And that is the weakest part where it actually broke. That would be the weakest part that would break under stress. So we've got our lifting handle. If that is loose, then you know your suspension is too loose, but that's tight. But I can still move my shock. And here we are, my original Royal Enfield shocks, still in good condition, that I removed because I basically found them impractical. They just kept bottoming out all the time, right? Every time I went over a severe bump, this part would touch the top part of the suspension. And again, I think that's what's happened on this incident. Because he was on preload setting 1, which a bike should never be on, a Royal Enfield Meteor 650 should never be on preload setting 1, no matter how heavy you are. If you're light, like, you know, I'm 90 kilograms, that setting is too low for me. It needs to be 2 or 3 minimum, and that at least will stop the suspension from bottoming out at high speed on a bump. But anyway, I'm so glad that I've changed them. They are extremely heavy, so I can't say that they're poor quality. They're just not good at doing their job. The quality seems to be there. I don't think there's inferior parts used or inferior metal used. And the rubber and the seal, it should move. You can see that the shim inside is slightly wider than the shock itself. So it should stop you from over tightening, but I think when you put brackets on, it changes the shape of the metal and you can squeeze that metal too much and actually cause the metal to touch the metal outer part of the suspension, and that's what restricts the movement of the shock. I considered reaching out to Royal Enfield directly for their take on this issue, but I knew what the response would be: a standard generic reply advising against using aftermarket products on the rear suspension mount. They'd likely emphasise that only their specially designed panniers, which use the approved mounting points, are recommended and approved for use. But here's the thing, Royal Enfield, you're a year too late in introducing this product. During that time, many of us were left with no choice but to turn to aftermarket solutions. These products have served us well, filling the gap where official options were lacking. After considering Royal Enfield's stance, I decided to take a different approach and reached out directly to Hagon, the company behind the aftermarket shocks I've installed. I wanted to hear their perspective on this mounting point issue. To my surprise, I received a detailed response within an hour. Talk about great customer service. Top marks to Hagon. What really caught me off guard, though, was their reassurance. According to Hagon, there's absolutely no problem using this mounting position as long as the bolt holding the rear suspension unit isn't over-tightened. This was incredibly reassuring to hear from the experts themselves. And my reasons for making this video today? First of all, peace of mind. I wanted to put my own mind at ease about the aftermarket stay I've installed on my bike. It's important to me to know that my setup is safe and reliable. Secondly, I wanted to respond to some of the concerns raised by AutoRev in his recent video. And thirdly, and last of all, I wanted to show my support to the aftermarket brands. I'm here to defend and support the quality of aftermarket accessory makers like Zana and Enginia. These brands have earned their place in our community, and I want to reassure anyone using their products that they can ride with confidence. Tomorrow, myself and Mrs. T, we travel to the 365-day cruise event by Royal Enfield. If you'd like to see that video, you know what to do. Please subscribe to Teacher T, and I'll see you on a video very soon.